As crack cocaine hit the streets of the United States of America in the 1980s, it was a chance for every street hustler to capitalize, but everything changed in the 1990s when every drug lord was getting the maximum sentence in prison, so the entertainment business became a way out as it was a legitimate way of making millions of dollars. Until today, most people hustling in the streets want to get into the hip-hop game because they saw how much money can be made in the music business. From Death Row Records to Cash Money Records, these companies I have mentioned have made over $100 million in revenue, so sit back and enjoy this video as I list the one of the greatest kingpins that changed the hip-hop game. The Supreme Team was a New York City-based organized crime group that operated in the 1980s. Their main office was located in Baisley Park, a neighborhood in South Jamaica, Queens, New York City. Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his nephew Gerald Prince Miller served as the group's commanders. Kenneth McGriff was born on September 19, 1960, in family-friendly South Jamaica, Queens, as the middle child of three. McGriff's parents were both city drivers, and the family was middle class. While attending Catherine and Count Basie Junior High School, McGriff was introduced to the 5% Nation, a faction of the Nation of Islam. The 5% Nation, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths or the Five Percenters, is a black nationalist movement influenced by Islam created in 1964 in the Harlem neighborhood of Manhattan. Members of the group refer to themselves as Allah's Five Percenters, which reflects the idea that 10% of the world's population is chosen to be superiors, who know the truth of existence but choose to keep the other 85% in ignorance and under their control. The remaining 5% are those who know the truth and are determined to enlighten the other 85%. McGriff's involvement with the group earned him the righteous name, the Supreme. Cocaine powder was a key cash crop for South American countries, particularly Colombia. Until the 1960s, very few people had heard about cocaine, and demand was low. Colombian trafficking gangs, like as the Medellin cartel, established a distribution system that transported cocaine from South America into the U.S. market by sea and air routes via the Caribbean and the South Florida coast as demand grew. Trafficking groups supervised all operations in the United States, including the conversion, packing, shipping, and first-level distribution of cocaine. Crack production began in the early 1980s. Unlike powder cocaine, crack was easier to develop, less expensive to produce, and less expensive to purchase, making it more economically accessible. Crack cocaine was known for its immediate and strong high, which left users demanding more, resulting in an increase in crack cocaine addictions. The number of cocaine users increased by 1.6 million between 1982 and 1985. Crack cocaine first developed in Miami, where Caribbean immigrants taught teenagers how to turn powdered cocaine into crack. The adolescents soon introduced the production and distribution of crack cocaine into other major U.S. cities, including New York City, Detroit, and Los Angeles. When crack struck the streets of Queens, Kenneth McGriff saw an opportunity he couldn't pass up and decided to start his own gang named the Supreme Team, with his nephew Gerald Prince Miller as his second in command. McGriff met local drug lord Fat Cat Nichols through a fellow 5%er, Prince Rasheen, who was Nichols' cousin. Fat Cat was a member of the Seven Crowns, a gang that also formed in New York. The 5%ers and the Seven Crowns were at war at the time over territory, but McGriff, as a businessman, saw the broader picture by partnering with Fat Cat. Under McGriff's leadership, the Supreme numbers reached the hundreds, and the team dominated the crack cocaine trade in Baisley Park. McGriff set up a sophisticated security system surrounding the projects, with lookouts armed with walkie-talkies stationed on the roofs of nearby buildings. If police officers came into the area, McGriff's security crew would notify their dealers, who would subsequently conceal incriminating evidence. Neighborhood kids who supported McGriff were given special goodies such as basketball tournaments and musical concerts. The gang focused its illegal activities on the extensive distribution of crack cocaine. At its peak in 1987, the Supreme Team's daily earnings surpassed $200,000, and the gang committed acts of violence and murder on a regular basis to retain its monopoly on the area's crack trade. What McGriff and Miller were doing in Queens rang bells in Queens and across the city. The money, power and respect they commanded for a handful of years became a creative inspiration to a formative generation of young hip-hop artists such as LL Cool J, Nas and countless others. McGriff was convicted of drug possession in 1985 and sentenced for some time in Elmira State Prison in New York. While McGriff completed his sentence, the Supreme Team was placed under the command of McGriff's lieutenant, Gerald Miller. Miller was known for being violent and merciless, and hundreds of people were tortured, beaten, and murdered under his command. McGriff, as the organization's leader, was blamed for the new, considerably more violent commercial operations. He was returned to jail for engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise as soon as he was released from Elmira in 1987. He was sentenced to 12 years in jail for the offense following a plea agreement. While Miller was arrested on state charges in late 1987, a task team of NYPD and FBI officers executed search warrants on a number of Supreme Team storage locations, drug shops, and residences. Despite the fact that the gang was given advance notice of the raid and was able to remove 11 kilograms of cocaine and $200,000 from the targeted premises, authorities seized a variety of weapons, narcotics trade hardware, photographs, documents, and instructional manuals on criminal conduct, as well as a kilogram of cocaine and thousands of dollars. McGriff ordered the gang's operations to be halted following the raid. The dominant world of crack cocaine for Kingpins in New York came to an end on February 26, 1988, when 22-year-old New York City police officer Edward Byrne was watching over a man who was a witness in a narcotics case in Queens. The witness had faced death threats. His home had been firebombed. Byrne was parked in front of the house when, around 3 a.m., a car drove up alongside the patrol car. Two men got out, and one of the men fired 5 rounds into the patrol car. Drug kingpin Howard "Pappy" Mason would eventually be convicted of ordering 4 of his men to carry out the hit. Mason had been convicted of gun possession 2 days prior to Byrne's death. Prosecutors said he ordered the murder in revenge. The police established a task team to specifically fight drug kingpins and disrupt their drug trade operations. This was the period when drug kingpins and others who worked for them began to get life sentences, resulting in the demise of drug organizations. When Miller was freed from prison in the spring of 1989, he set about rebuilding the Supreme Team and regaining control of 2 of its most profitable retail sites, known as spots. The reformed gang, led by Miller, reclaimed its grasp on the local drug trade and increased its daily gross receipts to $10,000. When Miller noticed that the organization wasn't producing as much money as it used to, he began robbing drug dealers and Colombian drug suppliers, but he was caught again in March 1990. In 1993, he was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms for cocaine trafficking. Unlike Miller, who is still imprisoned, McGriff was able to see the outside world again. The world he returned to in 1994 was a far cry from the one he had left over a decade before. As a result of the 1988 death of New York police officer Edward Byrne, the crack game was changed. But hip-hop as well. Before, rap was the little brother to the streets. And though rap was dependent on the hustlers and gangsters for its artistic and inspiration, hip-hop was now a big business. Rappers were now the superstars. The former drug lord decided to change his ways and opened a barbershop near his parents' house. He also started making plans to enter the film industry, with the intention of remaking a Donald Goines crime novel. McGriff began meeting rappers and urban musicians, frequently providing them with safety, after being acquaintances with hip-hop producer Irv Gotti. Before he and 50 Cent became rivals, 50 Cent's friend robbed Ja Rule, and McGriff was able to reclaim Ja Rule's possessions with a single phone call, thanks to his contacts in Queens. McGriff, on the other hand, was returned to prison for several parole violations. He was released in 1997 after serving another 2.5 years in prison. Because of his money and influence, he assisted Gotti with his Murder Inc. The company would end up being one of the top record labels in hip-hop in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Got my nigga Bream in the house. What up, nigga? You know, whole Murder Inc. family in this motherfucker. Hey, yo, the next joint I want to do with my new album is shit.
In 2000, McGriff flew to Los Angeles in an attempt to purchase the rights to Goins' novel. He lined up a cast, locations, and even pre-released a volume of music for the film consisting of musicians on Gotti's Murder Incorporated record label. The film Crime Partners was shot later that year in Harlem, New York, and included appearances by Ja Rule, Snoop Dogg and Ice-T. McGriff optioned the rights to 4 more Goins books, with the vision to produce a franchise. McGriff is surrounded by 2 of rap's most successful stars, and they are keeping an eye out for him. Every night, they're in various places with money, power, and women. And everything is legal. Jay-Z, who spent a lot of time on the streets transporting narcotics up and down Interstate 95 before music became a viable choice, viewed McGriff as an OG he wanted to cultivate into a legitimate existence. He and Gotti were now telling, almost asking, McGriff to go legal. They put him in rooms where multi-million-dollar legal bargains were struck. But, for McGriff, the street life is what he knew and lived his entire life. He couldn't let go of it because he believed that by keeping off the streets, people would no longer view him as supreme, and he would lose the respect of Queens. On February 1, 2007, McGriff was convicted of murder for hire at a federal court in the Eastern District of New York on charges that he paid $50,000 to have 2 rivals, Eric E. Moneybags Smith and Big Nose Troy Singleton, killed in 2001. The jury deliberated for 5 days before finding McGriff guilty of murder conspiracy and drug trafficking. On February 9, 2007, McGriff was sentenced to life in prison. Throughout this case he was defended by a court-appointed attorney because nearly all of his assets had been seized. McGriff murdered E. Moneybags because E. Moneybags murdered Black Just, McGriff's best friend. So, in 2001, McGriff exacted his revenge by shooting up E. Moneybags' SUV, killing him on the spot. Big Nose Troy Singleton was also assassinated because McGriff suspected Singleton of wanting to avenge E. Moneybags' death. There were also rumors that McGriff ordered the hit on 50 Cent in 2000, which resulted in 50 Cent being shot 9 times for exposing street dealings in his song Ghetto Quran. McGriff began serving his life sentence at ADX Florence, a federal supermax prison in Colorado. In 2011, he was transferred to the United States Penitentiary, Lee, a high-security federal prison in Pennington Gap, Virginia. As of 2021, he was housed at USP McCreary in Pine Knot, Kentucky. Let us now travel to the West Coast to meet the man who funded Death Row Records. Not everyone in hip-hop is familiar with Harry O., the West Coast kingpin who transitioned from selling cocaine to developing profitable respectable enterprises. Michael Harry O. Harris was born on September 20, 1960, on West 46th Street in south-central Los Angeles' Low Bottoms neighborhood. He was raised by a single mother in a single-parent household. She worked 2 jobs, leaving her with little time to care for her son. Michael's father, a wealthy businessman with 3 families, abandoned him when he was 5 years old. His mother tried hard to make sure that he had a semblance of a normal family life, as well as an alternative to what the increasingly dangerous streets of South Central had to offer. She helped to send him to West Los Angeles Community College. Unfortunately, her vision was not to be. This was the turbulent 1960s. Machinations were already underway that would affect Michael's young adulthood. Racial and economic tensions were reshaping the public consciousness. The civil rights movement was well underway, with the Black Power movement soon to follow. In the black working-class city of Oakland, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was born. The party would have a profound influence on black youth nationwide, especially in cities along the West Coast. They influenced many ghetto youths to politicize and organize. As the 60s transitioned into the 70s, the Panthers were weakened through infighting and assaults by various government agencies. After being inspired by the Panthers, many street gangs in Los Angeles began to fill the hole that had been left. They became more military, and their feuds became more numerous and violent. Almost every black gang in Los Angeles soon claimed allegiance with either the Bloods or the Crips. They identified with their area of origin while under that flag, breaking into distinct sets or factions. Michael Harris joined a blood group known as the Bounty Hunters. In the 1980s, a cheaper, smokeable version known as crack made the drug accessible to the poorer classes. South Central was ground zero for the crack explosion, and Michael Harris was in a position to capitalize. He began selling cocaine with his younger brother David and became what fellow Bloods might have referred to as a baller, or a fellow gang member who strikes it rich in the drug trade. They also made important contacts with members of the rolling 60s Crip Street Gang. As their revenues increased, they opened a number of crack homes in their hometown of South Central Los Angeles and adjacent Long Beach, California. They eventually created a distribution network that included Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Michigan, Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, Florida, and New York. The pair often shipped 200-pound cocaine shipments to areas like Shreveport and Chicago. Following one such shipment to Detroit, law enforcement was able to recover a $1 million cash payment on its way back to Los Angeles. The gang were allegedly supplied by Colombian national and suspected Cali cocaine cartel high-ranking member Mario Ernesto Villabona Alvarado. In 1985, he met Lydia Robinson at a nightclub in Houston, whom he eventually married. He was so adept at moving the product that Colombian suppliers were encouraged to deal with him directly. At age 26, Michael Harrio Harris was a millionaire. Harris determined at this point that it was time to leave the drug industry behind and pursue more genuine aims. He started investing in real estate and other enterprises. He ran a limousine service with 20 vehicles, hair salons, an exotic car dealership, and a construction company. Harris also appeared to have an interest in the entertainment sector. Stepping into Tomorrow, a play he created, included the daughters of the late black leaders Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, as well as the children of Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier. He also produced Checkmates, a Broadway drama starring Ruby Dee, Paul Winfield, and a rising star named Denzel Washington. Washington, a native of Mount Vernon, New York, had already developed quite a resume by the time Checkmates premiered on Broadway. He was known for playing Dr. Philip Chandler on the acclaimed hospital drama St. Elsewhere. He had been nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for Cry Freedom. Checkmates was his Broadway debut, adding to what had already been shaping up to be a stellar career. Checkmates was also a landmark in a very different sense. Michael Harris, gang member and cocaine kingpin, was the first African American to produce a Broadway show. This milestone might have been more celebrated had it not been for his previous occupation. The fact that he was arrested as Checkmates premiered on Broadway certainly didn't help matters at all. Harris was caught and accused with kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and selling cocaine. He started serving a jail sentence in 1987. He served his 30 years plus at the top security San Quentin jail. He married Lydia Robinson while still incarcerated. Around the time Suge Knight was working hard to launch Death Row Records, Harris reportedly recruited California attorney David Kenner to handle his appeal and try to have him released from prison on probation. Death Row Records was an up-and-coming label in the early 1990s which was badly in need of funding. In 1991, Harris told his attorney David Kenner that he had heard about Suge Knight and Death Row Records, and asked Kenner to facilitate a deal with Suge Knight, the CEO of Death Row Records, who met with Harris in prison, where they concluded a deal in terms of which Harris set up a multimedia company called Godfather Entertainment that would serve as the parent company of Death Row Records. Through Godfather Entertainment, Harris invested $1.5 million in Death Row Records in exchange for 50% of Death Row. Harris became a silent partner, allowing for only Suge Knight's name to be on the Death Row Records paperwork, and his wife to be the CEO of Godfather Entertainment. Harris wanted to be a silent partner because it is against the law for inmates to run business enterprises while they are in prison.
The label started with Dr. Dre, who was going to do his own thing, and with a lot of help from Suge Knight and Harry O and a number of people, and we got it all together.
With the help of Kenner, Knight began signing young, inner-city California-based artists and arranged for Death Row Records to handle the soundtrack for the 1992 film, Deep Cover. The single, Deep Cover, a young Snoop Doggy Dogg as his protege. Work soon began on The Chronic, Dr. Dre's debut solo album, which heavily featured Snoop and the rest of the label's core roster. The album, which was released on December 15th and peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Top 200, went on to sell 5.7 million records worldwide, establishing the West Coast in the hip-hop industry and popularizing the distinctive style of G-Funk. Death Row went on to become one of music's most storied and infamous labels. Harris was expected to get royalty checks from Suge Knight, but that never happened because Suge Knight and Kenner bridged the ownership arrangement. Kenner, who had been appointed by Harris, was now working for Knight. Death Row Records offices prohibited all phone calls from jail, and Knight no longer visited Harris. Nonetheless, despite his huge success, Suge Knight did not keep his pledge to pay Harris's money. As a result, Harris sent Death Row Records a letter threatening to sue if he was not rewarded for his first $1.5 million investment. Harris eventually filed a lawsuit against Death Row Records, but it was dismissed by Interscope, Death Row's distribution parent. Interscope ultimately paid Harris only $300,000. No further payments were made, and in 2002 Harris filed another lawsuit against Death Row Records, claiming that despite receiving $300,000, Death Row still owed him Harris millions in unpaid profits and royalties. Harris was awarded a $107 million by the court. However, by 2006 it was clear that Suge Knight and Death Row Records were unable to pay the full amount, and so Suge Knight was forced to file bankruptcy and Death Row Records was auctioned off for $24 million, even though Michael Harris only received payment of $1 million from the $107 million judgment. In 2019 it was announced that after 31 years of imprisonment the co-founder of Death Row Records would be released. Harry O has since been released, and wherever he goes he will always be known as the man behind the rise of Death Row Records. Let us now move on to our final destination, Detroit, and find out more about the Felony Brothers, two of the most notorious drug dealers of all time. The brothers ran a drug business for almost 20 years without being caught by the police. This is the story of the Black Mafia family. Hip-hop has been captivated by BMF's tale of rising from poverty to fame for a very long time. Over the years, several tunes have mentioned the Black Mafia family and its leadership. They served as the model for the most recent 50 Cent produced Starz TV series BMF. Where were you when Big Meech brought the tigers in? Because I was busy earning stripes like a tiger skin. The Felony Brothers, Big Meech and Southwest T. Big Meech was 4 years older than Southwest T. The brothers quickly understood that there wouldn't be many options to get out of their predicament during an economic depression. They thus started peddling drugs while still in high school, In Detroit streets, they started out by selling $50 bags of cocaine to locals. During those years, they became bigger and bigger, and by the 2000s, they had built a sizable organization that was in charge of multiple kilograms of cocaine distribution cells spread throughout several states. The brothers were employed by the boss E.D. Boyd, who taught them a lot about the drug trade before they decided to go independent. Big Meech began dating a woman in Detroit, and this woman was the younger sister of Dexter Hussey, better known as Sosa. Big Meech regularly hid drugs at his girlfriend's house, and one day Sosa discovered them in a secret location. Knowing that the drugs belonged to Big Meech because everyone in Detroit was aware of his business, Sosa sold all the drugs in one night. When Big Meech ran out of inventory and needed more drugs to sell, he instructed his girlfriend to retrieve the drugs he had given her to conceal. When the girlfriend went to her house to retrieve the drugs, however, she discovered they were missing. She then asked her brother Sosa, "Where are the drugs that were in my room?" Sosa responded that the drug's owner should come pick up the drugs. Big Meech didn't waste any time in going to see Sosa and asking him what had happened to the narcotics. To Meech's surprise, Sosa pulled out a large sum of cash and presented it to him. Sosa started working with Big Meech and Southwest T till the organization's pinnacle. Big Meech was pleased and decided to offer Sosa a position. As the empire grew, the brothers started adding new members to the BMF organization. Other BMF members included Chad Brown, also known as Jobo, who was in charge of all the drug distribution routes, Fleming Daniels, who was from New York, who oversaw all BMF operations on the East Coast, William "Doc" Marshall, who handled the organization's bookkeeping, Craig Pettis, and another person, who served as the brothers' primary points of contact for their connection to the Mexican. Sosa was in charge of transporting cocaine across the country as well as laundering the money. Black Mafia family allegedly established strongholds in Alabama, California, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Tennessee as they continued to expand. In the entire U.S., they supposedly had over 500 affiliates working for them. At the height of their power, they were also buying more than 50 kilograms every 2 weeks in addition to controlling America. BMF Entertainment, which Big Meech created in 2000, functioned as both a record label and a promotional firm. Even though they only signed one singer to the fledgling company Blue Da Vinci, his debut album had appearances from some of the top stars of the time. Jeezy was another musician that benefited significantly from Meech's backing. The Flannery's backing and money helped Jeezy in his early career even though he was never technically signed to the company. Around 2003, he had a crucial role in the beginning of Jeezy's career. What he did in Atlanta was promote a lot of Jeezy's parties and help get his songs played in all the strip clubs, which is how rappers would make it or break it. For video shooting, he provided flashy automobiles and bizarre medallion pendants. Jeezy also spoke candidly about his close friendship with Big Meech. "You know, Jeezy appears in all these commercials and shouts out Meech and the Black Mafia family." Big Meech wanted everybody to be aware of his importance in the drug trade. Meech consequently maintained constant communication with many of the major hip-hop stars of the time. The gang earned a reputation for throwing lavish parties. There were rumors of nights spent with Puff. A tale of people stopping Jay-Z's car just to make him ask for their permission to move them. Meech genuinely appears in Joel Santana's "Make It Work For You" music video after the two met while visiting Harlem. Around 2003, 50 Cent became aware of BMF. However, since he had just released his debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', which at the time was generating a lot of attention, he made the decision to distance himself from BMF. In 2019, 50 Cent said to DJ Drama on Sirius XM, "They were so embedded into the music business, because when you can find your pockets, people like you around. When you at the nightclub and Puffy can't buy champagne because you bought all of it, they start to have to speak to you. I stayed away from it, because I know who I am, and I know how easy it is for me to. I might have bought something. Or it would be easy enough for people to make me involved without me being involved. I was doing too well. They would reach out to me and I would avoid it, because it just wasn't good for where I was at. Big Meech's intention to enter the music industry was merely a way to launder money. It was a strategy to finally legitimize BMF. He undoubtedly succeeded in generating a ton of buzz, which was largely made possible by his enormous financial resources. However, I believe that he also possessed an undeniable charisma. When these guys entered the club, everyone would either flee or jump for excitement since all the women would soon be chugging $600 bottles of champagne. Meech genuinely believed he could leave the drug trade and start a legitimate business. BMF and Big Meech were at the height of their fame in the music industry, especially in Atlanta. When Southwest T decided to move to Los Angeles in 2003 or 2004 to be closer to the connection while Meech stayed in Atlanta, the brothers were not speaking to one another at the time. Southwest T was not happy with Big Meech drawing attention to their drug business by going public, claiming it was foolish because the police were watching their every move. J-Bo has said that Southwest T began diluting the cocaine in order to undercut Meech. When people began complaining, the beef between them intensified. Big Meech and his crew led a unique lifestyle, but it wasn't always filled with fame, fortune, and fast vehicles. There was also violence and bumps in the road. Big Meech was too preoccupied with the entertainment industry's attempt to become legitimate. Big Meech and his group were out having fun one night in Atlanta, in 2003. The former bodyguard of Puffy, Wolf, was with his friend Rizzo. Back in 1995, Big Jake, Suge Knight's closest friend, was allegedly killed by Wolf. Okay, back to the nightclub event. Wolf arrived at the club unhappy because the woman he was dating was hanging out with BMF that night. When Wolf arrived at the club after being called and not being there earlier, the bouncers booted him out because of his disruptive behavior. Big Meech and a few BMF members left the club to settle the dispute, but things quickly became violent when Wolf and Rizzo began firing at BMF. As a result, Big Meech was shot in the butt and Bulls was shot in the leg. When a member of the BMF team retaliated, Wolf and Rizzo were instantly killed. Around 2004, Daniel Fleming, a member of the BMF, was responsible for killing a man who shot at the sky to get Daniel and the BMF crew to stop beating up his companion. The man fired rounds in the hope that they would stop, but doing so just made things worse. Daniel grabbed a loaded gun from his car and shot the man, instantly killing him. In October 2005, it was reported that some 30 members of BMF were arrested in a massive drug raid orchestrated by the DEA. During these operations, the DEA confiscated 2.5 kilograms of cocaine, $3 million in cash and other valuables, as well as multiple guns. The DEA had already detained 17 BMF members and recovered 632 kilograms of cocaine, $5.3 million in cash, and $5.7 million in assets before the operations in October 2005. They asserted that BMF was in charge of transporting more than 2,500 kilograms of cocaine each month across the country. Big Meech was busy in Atlanta as Southwest T conducted business on the West Coast, but the authorities had already wiretapped his calls. The government had 900 pages of typed transcripts of wiretap talks from Southwest T's phone over a 5-month period when charges were brought against the Big Meech and Southwest T. The brothers admitted running an ongoing criminal enterprise in November 2007. Both brothers received 30-year prison terms in September 2008 for operating a national cocaine trafficking organization between 2000 and 2005. Big Meech will be released on May 5, 2028, which will be close to his 60th birthday, after completing his sentence in the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan. In an effort to stop the COVID-19 epidemic from spreading inside federal prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons gave Southwest T a compassionate release and sent him to home confinement on May 5, 2020. This was done in part because of his health issues. Big Meech also requested his release under the same conditions, but a federal judge denied the request, stating that it would be premature to approve his release because his prison record suggests he hasn't changed and still promotes himself as a drug kingpin. The judge also noted that his disciplinary record includes violations like possessing a cell phone and weapons in addition to drug use. That is all for this video. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel for more upcoming videos. Don't forget to comment which drug kingpin stood out from the rest.